Welcome back to the deep dive. I hope you're ready because today we are not just wading in the shallow end, we aren't even swimming in the deep end.
No, I think it's safe to say we are leaving the pool entirely.
We are leaving the pool, we're leaving the building, and honestly, looking at the documents we have in front of us today, we might be leaving this dimension.
It definitely feels that way. We are peeling back the wallpaper of physical reality today to see what is actually holding the house up. And I have to warn you, the carpentry is not at all what you might expect.
It really isn't. We are settling in for a session that I found, frankly, mind-bending. It's a mix of philosophy, quantum physics, and, well, a detective story all rolled into one.
Yeah, it's got a very specific, slightly spooky, but weirdly humorous vibe to it.
Totally. Now, for the listener who might be new to this or who has only heard the name whispered in the corners of a metaphysical bookstore, we should set the stage. This is material dictated by a personality essence known as Seth.
Right, speaking through the medium Jane Roberts. This took place back in the 60s and 70s in upstate New York.
But before we jump in, we declare this podcast will be distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes. We want to ensure this information is accessible to everyone who wants to explore it.
Absolutely. So specifically today, we are zooming in on session 279 from the early sessions, book 6 of the Seth Material.
And the exact date of record for this one is Monday, August 15th, 1966. Time is 9:00 t.m.
Right. And just to set the scene, because context matters here, this has a bit of an unusual setup.
Yeah, usually Jane Roberts and her husband Robert Butts held their sessions on Wednesdays. They had a whole rhythm going.
They did. But on this particular week, Jane was indisposed for the regular time. So this is a makeup class, so to speak. It's a Monday night. The air is likely heavy. I mean, it's August in Elmira, New York.
Sounds sticky.
Very. Jane enters a trance state. Her husband, Robert, is ready with his pen to take notes in shorthand. And then Seth comes through.
And the tone of this specific session, how would you describe it?
I'd call it chillingly insightful. And I mean that in the best way possible. We aren't just talking about abstract philosophy here. Seth decides to give a masterclass on the mechanics of how we exist.
Our mission today is to unpack Seth's radical views on the self. We're going to look at why limitations are basically fake news, why being aggressive might actually be the most creative thing you can do, and then we're going to dissect an actual, literal blind test ESP experiment.
Yes, involving a mystery envelope, a black cat, and a trip to Ensenada.
I love the Ensenada detail. It is so specific and so weird. We are definitely going to break that down. But let's start with the heavy hitter, section 1, the illusion of limitation and this concept of inner climate.
Okay, so Seth opens this session with a statement that essentially pulls the rug out from under any sense of victimhood we might be holding on to. He says, and I quote, "All limitations basically are self-adopted."
Oof, that is a heavy start.
Self-adopted.
I have to push back on that a little bit just to play devil's advocate for you listening at home. If I walk off a cliff, I fall. I can't fly. I can't walk through walls. Are we saying those physical limitations are choices?
In a way, yes. But we have to be careful with how we define choice here. Seth argues that limitations aren't primary realities. They are illusions.
Illusions.
But here is the nuance. They are illusions we created for a specific purpose. We accepted these limitations to cope with physical existence. Think about it like a game engine.
A game engine, like a video game.
Exactly. If you are playing a video game, there are rules. You can't walk through the walls of the level. Gravity pulls your character down.
Right.
If you didn't have the limitation of gravity in baseball, the game would be impossible to play. The ball would just float away forever.
Okay, I see.
If you didn't have the limitation of a solid physical body, you couldn't hug someone or pick up a fork or eat a sandwich.
So we accept the handcuffs to play the game?
Precisely. The limitations give the experience structure. Without them, physical life would just be a chaotic blur of energy. But the problem arises when we forget that we put the handcuffs on ourselves.
We start thinking the handcuffs are the only reality.
Yes.
Yeah.
We get lost in the simulation. And Seth drives this home with a very powerful phrase. He says, your exterior circumstances are the materializations of inner climate.
Inner climate. I stopped reading when I hit that phrase. It's evocative. It sounds like a weather report for your soul. Like today's forecast is a heavy chance of anxiety with scattered thunderstorms of doubt.
That is actually a perfect analogy to understand the mechanic he is describing. If it is raining inside your head, if your inner climate is stormy, you're going to get wet outside.
Your physical reality creates the rain to match your internal state.
Yes, it goes way beyond just positive thinking. It implies a direct feedback loop. It's about the physics of reality creation.
So we aren't victims of our environment.
We are the projectors of it. Our physical life is a chemical and physical system that we initiated to experience this reality. We built the set, we wrote the script, and now we are acting in the play.
And often we find ourselves complaining about the plot twists that we wrote in the first place.
Exactly. It forces you to look at the environment as a mirror. If you don't like what you see in the mirror, you don't shave the mirror. You change your face. You change the inner climate.
That's empowering but terrifying. It means I can't blame bad luck anymore. If my car breaks down or I have a bad interaction at work, that's my inner climate materializing.
It removes the scapegoat, doesn't it? But Seth takes this even further than just our physical surroundings. He talks about multidimensionality.
He does, and this is where we start getting into the spooky mechanics. He says we are all existing in many dimensions at once.
Right now, while I'm sitting here talking to you and you're listening while commuting or washing dishes.
We tend to think of dimensions as places we go to, maybe after we die or if we travel in a spaceship.
Seth says no. We are straddling them right now. The difference between us and Seth isn't that he is special and we aren't. It is simply a matter of focus and awareness.
So we have tunnel vision.
Extremely effective tunnel vision. We are hyper-focused on this physical channel, this frequency. It's like we are watching Channel 4 so intently that we deny Channel 5 exists, even though the TV is receiving both signals.
Seth even uses the session itself as an analogy for this, doesn't he?
He does. He says we form a new dimension in our sessions.
That is interesting. So the meeting point, the room where Jane, Robert, and Seth interact, that is a constructed reality.
It's like a Venn diagram. Jane is in one dimension, Seth is in another. Where they overlap to communicate, that overlap creates a third dimension, a temporary reality, constructed just for that conversation.
That's trippy. It implies that every conversation we have might be creating a mini dimension of sorts.
It implies that consciousness creates form. That is the headline. Consciousness doesn't depend on the body. Seth says the body is just the spacesuit we use for this specific chemical system.
Okay, speaking of spacesuits and things that seem solid but aren't, let's move to section 2, the physics of thought and perception. Because this is where Seth starts sounding less like a philosopher and more like a quantum physicist who has had a very, very long weekend.
That is a fair description. He gets very technical here about how we build objects.
He talks about thoughts having bulk. Now, usually when I think of a thought, I think of wispy smoke, nothingness, ephemeral. But Seth says thoughts are things.
Yes, he is very specific about this. He says thoughts have psychic content and form. He explains that in other dimensions, specifically during projections or dream states, you would perceive a thought as having physical weight or bulk.
So if I have a heavy thought, say a deep worry about the future, in another dimension, I might literally be unable to lift it.
Theoretically, yes. Or it might appear as a large object blocking your path. Seth says, when it is perceived by you, then it has bulk. The bulk is the result of your own perception.
Wait, unpack that. The bulk is the result of your own perception.
He is challenging our definition of mass. In high school physics, we were taught that mass is an inherent property of an object. A rock is heavy because it is a rock.
Right.
Seth is saying no. A rock is heavy because your sensory system interprets that energy configuration as heavy. Mass isn't inherent, it's a translation of energy.
That breaks my brain a little bit. It suggests that weight is a subjective experience, not an objective fact.
And if you think that breaks your brain, let's talk about the musical chair.
Oh, this is my favorite part of the text, the chair example. This is a total whoa moment for me.
It really is. Seth points to the chair Jane is sitting in, a rocker, and says, this, for example, exists as a chair. It also exists as sound.
As sound. A chair is sound.
He says it has a counterpart that can be perceived exclusively in terms of other senses. He says you can hear the chair as a musical note in a trance state, for example, or with the use of drugs.
Okay, so if I'm in a deep trance, or maybe I've taken a hallucinogen, I don't see wood and fabric. I hear a C sharp.
Or a symphony, depending on the complexity of the chair. The point he is making isn't just about synesthesia. He is making a point about consensus reality.
Okay, meaning what exactly?
He is saying that our consciousness organizes atoms into objects based on expectation and agreement. We agree, okay, these atoms are a chair, so our eyes see a chair.
But if we shifted our perception, if we changed the frequency of our senses, that same cluster of energy would be perceived as a sound or maybe a color or a temperature.
Exactly. We are essentially hallucinating a consistent reality together. He says, you organize yourselves out of other matter, you see.
We are pulling order out of chaos. through sheer force of will and perception. We decided it is a chair, so it is a chair.
It makes you look at your furniture differently. Is my sofa actually a jazz chord?
It might be. And it begs the question, what does the universe actually look like without our eyes to interpret it?
Seth implies it is just a vast field of energy potentials that we collapse into chairs, tables, and people.
Which implies that if we changed our inner climate or our perceptual rules, the world would literally look different.
Exactly. And this leads directly into how we interact with this reality. If we are creators, how do we create? This brings us to section 3, where Seth redefines a word that usually has a lot of negative baggage: aggression.
Yeah, this word aggression. Usually when we hear aggression, we think fighting, war, anger, hostility. But Seth flips this completely on its head.
He does. He reclaims the word. Seth defines aggression as a forward thrust of creative activity.
A forward thrust. So it is not about attacking someone, it is about motion.
Exactly. He says projection, then, is aggression. The self thrusts forward into new dimensions, and this is creative.
Think about a sprout pushing through the soil. That is an aggressive act.
Yes, it is pushing against resistance to create life. If the sprout wasn't aggressive, it would rot in the ground.
I like that. It strips the violence out of the word and replaces it with vitality. So in this view, being passive means you aren't creating.
In Seth's view, yes, passivity is stagnation. Aggression is the movement of the self into new areas of experience. But there is a cost to this.
Right. And Seth ties this to a very powerful, somewhat paradoxical concept. Creation requires destruction.
This is the part that sounded a bit heavy. To create something new, the old version of you must symbolically die.
That sounds dramatic.
It is dramatic, but think about it symbolically. Seth uses the analogy of painting a picture. He says painting a picture is aggressive. You are thrusting energy into new forms.
Okay.
But here's the kicker. Each painting that you create represents the death of the self that you were before you created it.
Whoa. Let's pause on that. So the me that existed before I started recording this deep dive is gone.
Dead and gone. Replaced by the you who is currently recording, you have changed. You have added to your experience. The old, limited version of you had to die to make room for the new, expanded version.
You cannot hold on to the old self and simultaneously become the new self.
No, you can't. And the ego hates this.
It makes the ego sound like a bit of a drama queen.
Oh, the ego is absolutely a drama queen. Seth points this out repeatedly. The ego equates change and projection, especially out-of-body experiences, with physical death.
It's a control freak.
It wants to stay exactly the same forever because same feels safe.
So the ego is terrified of letting go, while the self, the bigger part of us, just wants to explore.
Correct. The ego is screaming, don't go into that new dimension, don't learn that new skill, we might die. But the self knows better.
And Seth says that successful projections or creative acts eventually teach the ego that it is safe, enriching it.
It realizes, oh, we didn't die, we just got bigger.
It is like dragging a scared friend to a party. They kick and scream, but by the end of the night, they are the one on the dance floor having the best time.
That is the perfect analogy for the relationship between the ego and the inner self. The ego eventually learns that destruction of the old self is actually just expansion into the new self.
Now, speaking of expansion and entering new worlds, Seth uses another metaphor here that I found really chilling in a cool way.
Yes, section 4. The art of projection versus the painting.
He compares projection, actually leaving your body to visit other dimensions, to entering a landscape of your own painting.
And it is a crucial distinction he makes. Seth says, when you paint a picture, you can only create it as a reality in so many dimensions.
Right. If I paint a house on a canvas, there is only one house. It is static. It doesn't have plumbing. No one lives there. It creates a mood, but it doesn't have its own life.
Exactly. A painting is a limited reality. It is safe because you, the artist, controlled all the elements. You are the god of that canvas. Nothing happens in the painting that you didn't authorize.
But Seth contrasts this with real projection.
Yes. When you project your consciousness into another system or dimension, it is not a static painting. It is a dynamic, living system.
He says another house could appear and another person could appear.
And that is the chilling implication. In a painting, you are the master. In a projection, you are a visitor. You are the alien.
He says you cannot visit them and leave no mark.
And the inhabitants might perceive you. You have to adapt instantly.
It is the difference between playing a video game in God mode, where you control everything, and suddenly getting dropped into the middle of a busy intersection in Tokyo or New York City.
Yes. In the intersection, The cars are real.
Yeah.
The people have their own agendas. They might honk at you. They might walk into you. If you aren't ready for that level of aggression, that level of creative thrust and interaction, it can be frightening.
But he presents it as the ultimate freedom.
He
Oh.
does. It is the ultimate expression of the self. To leave the safety of the static painting and enter the living, breathing multiverse.
So up to this point, we have got a lot of high-level theory. Thoughts are things with a bulk, chairs are music, aggression is creativity, and we are multi-dimensional travelers.
But one thing I appreciate about Seth and Jane Roberts is that they don't just leave it at philosophy.
No, Seth is a scientist of the mind, and in the session, he proves it with an experiment.
This brings us to Section 5, the envelope experiment. And I really love that the editors included this in the transcript because it grounds all this high-flying metaphysics in something tangible. It's messy, it's imperfect, and that's what makes it convincing.
Let's set the setup for the listener. It is relaxed, but there is tension in the room.
Right, so Robert, Jane's husband, has prepared a target. This is a double-blind test, essentially. Robert has taken an object, sealed it between pieces of cardboard so it can't be felt, and then sealed that inside double envelopes.
Just to clarify for the skeptic, Jane is in a trance. She can't see the envelope contents. She doesn't know what it is. Robert barely knows what it is because he prepared it quickly.
Correct. He grabbed something, sealed it, and handed it to the Seth personality.
And what was the object?
It was a penciled note written on white paper by their neighbor, a man named Leonard Yods.
Leonard had stuck it in their door earlier because the Butts family didn't have a phone, and Leonard had taken a message for them.
Okay, so the target is a physical note from a neighbor. But, and this is a big but, what was the note about? Because this becomes crucial.
The note was a message that Robert's mother had called. And connected to that, physically and emotionally, was a greeting card from Robert's mother that they had received a few days prior.
So you have the physical object, the note, and the emotional subject, the mother.
Let's see what Seth, speaking through Jane, picked up. Walk us through the impressions.
Jane holds the envelope to her forehead. The impressions start flowing. One of the first things she gets is a grave. Something grave.
Something grave. Now, looking at the facts, was there a death?
Not a death in that exact moment, but imminent death. Robert's father was very ill, and his sister-in-law's father, a Mr. Meeker, was near death.
And the phone call from the mother was about these illnesses.
Specifically about them. So grave is a direct hit on the emotional content of the message, even if the word wasn't written on the paper.
Wow, okay. It went straight to the emotional core. What else?
She gets a card with a cartoon.
But the object was a note, not a card.
True. But remember, the note was about the mother, and the mother had just sent a greeting card that was sitting in the house. And that card, it had a cartoon on it.
So her mind jumped from the note to the card because the sender, the energy of the mother, was the link.
Exactly. Seth explains this later. The mind follows the strongest emotional signal. The note was just a boring piece of paper. The mother was the emotional powerhouse. Her energy was attached to the concept of the note.
What about physical details? Did she get anything that was actually in the envelope?
She said the color white. The note was on white paper. That's a hit. Then she said something misplaced.
Now, this is interesting. The neighbor, Leonard, had lost his garden shears that week.
But also the greeting card itself had been lost in a stack of magazines in the Butts house.
Something misplaced. That's specific. It applies to both the author of the note and the subject of the note.
Then she gets black cat.
A black cat. Was there a cat in the envelope?
Yeah. Huh, no cat in the envelope. But the mother, again, the source of the message, has a neighbor with a black cat that she watches and talks about constantly. It is a strong mental image associated with her.
It was like playing word association, but telepathically. Mother leads to cat.
Precisely. And then she says apples.
Apples.
Fact check. There is a large apple tree in the parents' backyard in Sayre, PA. But also, and this is the local connection, Leonard, the neighbor who wrote the note, had been threatening to cut down the apple tree in Jane and Robert's yard. It caused a bit of conflict.
So apples links the neighbor who wrote the note and the mother who the note was about. That is a double hit.
It connects the two primary players in the drama. It is triangulation.
But the weirdest one, the one that really gave me chills when I read the transcript, was the Ensenada mystery.
Yes, the Ensenada mystery. Jane, in trance, suddenly says the word Ensenada.
Now, for those who don't know, Ensenada is a city in Baja California, Mexico, not exactly upstate New York.
No, it's totally out of left field.
So was this a miss?
Robert didn't think so. He connected it to a camping trip he and Jane took to Baja California with Jane's father years ago.
But what does that have to do with the note?
Seth explains it later in the session. He says it was a very distant connection. The concept of camping with parents was the link. The mother's card brought up memories of parents. The mind scanned for parents plus travel plus camping and pulled up Ensenada.
That shows how the mind jumps through associations during ESP. It is not like reading a fax, it is like interpreting a dream.
Exactly. It illustrates the associative nature of consciousness. We don't file things alphabetically, we file them emotionally. And there is one more detail that shows how the mind tries to translate abstract energy into data. Jane got the letters INC and the numbers 1418.
Was that on the note?
No, but listen to this. The mother's zip code on the envelope of the greeting card, which she wrote by mistake, was 18840. And the date on the note was August 14th, or 8/14.
1418, 18840, 814. It is like the brain is trying to tune in a radio station and getting the frequency just slightly off. You get the static, but the rhythm is there.
Seth calls this distorting the data as it comes through the physical channels. You get the shape, but maybe not the exact precision. It is a close but no cigar moment. But statistically, getting those specific numbers is wildly improbable.
So what is the verdict on the experiment? What are we supposed to learn from this hodgepodge of cats, apples, and zip codes?
The analysis shows that Jane's mind latched onto the greeting card, the object with the strong emotional connection to the mother, rather than just the note inside the envelope.
The key insight being emotions act as a beacon for ESP.
Absolutely. If you want to send a telepathic message, don't just think a word, feel it. The inner climate projects the signal. The data, the numbers, the words are secondary to the emotional thrust.
So bringing it all together, we have covered a massive amount of ground today. We've gone from the chair is a song to I can see inside sealed envelopes to I am a multidimensional traveler.
And it all ties back to that very first point we discussed. Limitations are illusions.
Right. Whether it is the limitation of the physical body, which we can transcend through projection, or the limitation of time and space, which we can transcend by reading a letter inside a sealed envelope, the inner self knows no boundaries.
The walls of the house really are just wallpaper. And once you realize that, you realize that you can change the wallpaper.
And we are the ones holding the paint roller. That is a lot to process.
It is. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, it implies that our potential is vastly larger than we give ourselves credit for. We aren't just meat suits walking around a rock. We are multidimensional creators, actively building our reality moment by moment, thought by thought.
I have a final provocative thought for you listening right now. Based on what we learned today about inner climate, if we create our reality and our environment is a materialization of inner climate, look around the room you're in right now.
Yes, do it. Look at your desk. Look at your car. Look at your kitchen.
What does that pile of laundry or that specific piece of art you chose or that broken light bulb you haven't fixed, what does that say about the current weather of your soul?
And if you painted a picture of your life today, are you brave enough to step inside it and meet whoever or whatever is waiting there?
That is the question. If you want to dive deeper into the rabbit hole, and we strongly suggest you do, because we only scratched the surface of session 279, you need to go to the source.
This material comes from the Seth Material, published by the New Awareness Network.
We encourage you to study the Seth Material books and visit the New Awareness Network website and bookstore at sexcenter.com/early sessions. There are volumes of this stuff, and it is truly mind-blowing.
It really is the gold standard for this kind of information.
Keep your inner climate sunny, folks, and we will see you in the next dimension.